Welcome to Management Information Systems 2 Part 0 of the Excel tutorial. Why are we looking at Excel? Overall, it's a spreadsheet calculation program, but we are now looking at it as a management information system. Well, while it was intended and still is mostly used for spreadsheet calculations, so adding that cell to that cell, having our transactional data, looking how much revenue we made automatically, it is still used for those purposes and you should be familiar with them, but I feel those are quite easy to learn once you understand the basics of Excel. But it's also used by managers because oftentimes we have a lot of data sources which we can copy into Excel, and then we have different data sources and we can join them together, and we might have a question in mind and we need information to answer that question to make a better decision. And by joining those tables, transforming the data together, then after joining them, aggregating them differently, making a cool dashboard, so to say, in Excel, we might have the information we need as a foundation to make better decisions. And by that, we often build our own pipelines of data over Excel, transforming it into a dashboard as a management information system tools by using that pipeline. Hence, we, so to say, misuse Excel for a different purpose. And to be totally clear, most of the time, different tools would have been better because they're built from the ground up for those purposes. However, Excel is within every company deeply embedded. Most people are familiar with using Excel. Most people have Office installed so they can open Excel documents and Excel files. So Excel is used in a lot of moments in companies where it shouldn't be used. Hence, if everyone uses it, you should be able to use it in the same way, because even if you, because you in the end of this and the lecture MIS2 will be more familiar with different tools and can make use of them, probably your boss, your manager isn't, and probably once in your work life he will get to you and say, hey, do this and do the following, and then you have to use Excel. So I want to show you at least how to join tables, and in the end, throughout this tutorial, we want to be able to use the wenn, or in English if clause. We want to be able to use S-Verweis in Germany, or in English VLOOKUP, and we want to be able to use a pivot table. Once we understand those basic Excel formulas within this tutorial, we will then turn into a combination of Python, which you're already familiar with. Now we understand the fundamentals of programming, and Excel, because Python can be used within Excel to make some of those heavy used tasks. So this a man-force intensive task I will learn you today, where you have to write a lot of Excel formulas. You can automate that through using Python, which we'll see in the next tutorials. But now let's dive into using Excel. And this is basically the Excel spreadsheet I gave to you, and you can see there are two options here, and we're currently in exercises. So if you're not in exercises, click on that, please. And the tutorial is divided into several parts and exercises. We are currently in part 0, where we'll talk about the basic fundamentals. So what's a cell? How can we do basic calculations? What is a function? How can we do display tables differently? So the whole formatting part, and what are tabs. Then we will go into part 1, where we talk about the if clause. There's then an exercise which you work on alone, and then there's a solution video uploaded where you can view the solution. And going through that style, we will then have a part 2, a part 3, and a part 4, and then the tutorial is over. In the end, you're able to use pivot tables. Hopefully, that's at least what we want to achieve together here today. So let's start with the basics. What's a cell? What's a calculation? What's a function? What's the formatting part of it? So basic formatting you should be familiar with as well. And what are tabs? And let's start directly with what tabs are. Because basically, currently, we're in a tab called exercises, as you can see down here. And right beside that, there's another tab called data. Each tab, so to say, then consists one spreadsheet. This is then one spreadsheet. And those tabs, you can make several of them. Each consist individual spreadsheets. So you can divide your work. You do not have to make here the next table. You can use a different spreadsheet to put in the next table. In the end, we will need 4 spreadsheets working on that tutorial. We have the one with our data sources, We have the one with text, which explains what we need to do, so the exercises, and we need two different tabs, which we now will already make by clicking this plus symbol. One we will call results, because in that table we will store our results. So we try to transfer the data source set in that spreadsheet with some transformation and store it in a new tab called results. We can rename this new tab by double clicking on it and just writing results, and then it's renamed like that. The other table which we will need, we will call help, because for the sum of the calculations we want to do, it's easier to have an intermediary step in the transformation part. And this intermediary step will not be part of the results, nor will it be part of the original data. So we need a different tab, or I like to use a different tab, where I do all those intermediary steps in a helping spreadsheet, which I then know everything which I do not need in the end result, but helps me to get to the result, I put in there. We can reorient those tabs as well, for example, by clicking on it with left click, holding the left click button pressed, we can now drag it around, and I'd like to have the exercises to the right and data results held in that order. But it's up to you which order you want. Just click on it, hold the click, and then drag it around wherever you want. All right, so much to tabs. Let's dive into the data set, click on it, and talk about cells. So in each of those tabs, we have a spreadsheet, and each spreadsheet is divided by columns and rows and cells. So let's click, for example, here. We're currently in one cell, as you can see by the green border. This cell can be described as being in column H and line 3, which you see is highlighted as well. You can always see which cell we are in by looking to the top left as well. As you can see, we're in cell H3. So in that cell currently there's no information. However, for example, in C3 there's information. Exactly, they're standing Ludwigsburg. And one row down, so C4, as you can see, there's Reutlingen. One column to the right, we would go from C to D, and there would be the store Reutlingen 1. So basically, they're numbered, the rows from 1 to a really high number, so numbers are rising, and the columns are numbered, so to say, alphabetical. So starting by A, then B, then C, and once we reach Z, we go back to AA, then AB, AC, and so forth. And by that we can identify each cell. All right. So let's start out with some calculations and formulas before we dive into formatting and displaying, so to say. Let's just click on an empty cell to the right. Doesn't matter which one. I am now at J3, but I could go to K4 as well. It doesn't matter that much. Basically, what I want to show you is that so far we only put in data to the left. But what we could do is make calculations with these data, or calculations independent of those data sets. If we want to use a formula or a calculation, we indicate that by writing the equals symbol. So we either click on the cell and directly write now, or we click on the cell and click on top here. Then the cell is still marked and we can write our text here. Depending on what you want to write, it's sometimes easier to write directly in the cell or on top. It doesn't matter, both ways are achievable. But if you're in the top, you already see what option you have here, because basically you write a formula. So by writing equals 1 plus 1, this cell should make the calculation of equals 1 plus 1. So the result should be 2, and it is. And as you can see, I could write it down here as well. I could equals 2 plus 2. That would result in a 4. So I can do now small calculations. However, for that I could just use my calculator. The power of Excel is that it's a spreadsheet, so I can make calculations dependent on cells, and this, if the value of the cell changes, the result will change automatically. That means, for example, if those would be transactions, I could now write that the revenue I made could be the result of this cell plus this cell. So the revenue of day 1 plus the revenue of day 2 should be the overall revenue of the month, for example. And as you can see, now 2 plus 4 equals 6 is in that cell, because in cell K4, which is this one, 2 is in cell K5, which is this one, 6 is in, and this one is the result of K4 plus K5. So I can make calculations dependent on cells, and if I now change the cell, for example that to 4, it automatically turns to 8. So much so far for calculations. Let's just put a third cell here. So now I have 4, 4, 4. And now what I could do as well is use formulas. We start in the same way that we write the equal symbol, but now we need to know write text as a symbol for formula. For example, you could make the sum of those three, which would then be sum. You could make the average, which would then be average. Now we get into a small problem, because that's country specific. So dependent on which operating system and which version of Office or Excel you have installed with the language settings, those formulas are named differently. I will try to always name the German formula and the English formula, because those are the two languages I'm familiar with. My own installment here is German, so I will always have to type the German versions of it. If you're then from a different country, you need to write your country specific formula. The easiest way to get there is just use Google. However, sometimes as a newbie, which uses Excel for the first time, you do not know what to Google for. So another way Excel natively built into it is you could use the Formulas tab. And by clicking then on Formula or Insert Function, probably in English, you can now see different formulas. The one you used the last time, for example, sum in German is Summe, Mittelwert in English then average, and so forth, or the if clause or the when clause in Germany. As well as you have overall topics like financial math, whatever statistics, database stuff, all of that stuff. All right, and you can click on that, and then it gets inserted, and you have a tool which helps you through the functions. To be honest, if you use Excel quite a lot, you do not use this function formula insert. You do know the formulas you know and type it directly into, which we will now do. I will now try to calculate the average. So if you have an American operating system, that should be average, all in caps letters, and then open brackets, and in the end, if you finish, close brackets. However, since I'm in the German operating system, I have to type Mittelwert. That you type correctly, you can always see that there's already the options you can now filter through based on what you started. If I want to calculate the Mittelwert, or the average, and I open the bracket, I already can see what I have to type into. I first have to give now the formula the first number, then a semicolon the second number, then a semicolon the third number. So I could now make the Mittelwert of this, semicolon this, semicolon this. Then it should be the Mittelwert out of those three numbers. And if I close the bracket, since it's 4 plus 4 plus 4 divided by 4, which the formula should be, it should be 4. However, if I do have a row of numbers, I could easily just drag those three numbers by holding left click, dragging down, then close, and it should lead to the same formula in the end. This double point means from K3 to K5, the whole row. All right, now we do know how formulas work, and we will use them later on in the next parts. Now coming to formatting, which is an essential part of your later business life. Because to be honest, if you do not do it for yourself, you probably do it because your boss wants it. They do not have much time, Hence, the information you give them should be in a way that they can easily access it and fast access it. So they do not want to search in that table where the number stands. In the end, you need to format it that they can see directly what they need to see. So formatting is a huge part. And this is not formatted quite nicely. First of all, as you can see in exercises, I tend to have one column to the left and one column to the top as a border, so the text is not in directly starting with the border and it's hard to read. I'd like to have there a border around it so it's easier to read. You do not have to do that. It's just my preferences, and I've seen that a lot of others do have the preference as well. So to do that, you need to insert one column to the left and one row to the top. How do you do it? First of all, you mark the whole column by clicking here on top of that. Then you click right click. Then you have options, and insert cells inserts one column to the left. So in conclusion, if you now mark the top row, do the same thing, insert cells, you have one row to the top. Now the border is a bit wider than it needs to be, so we can adjust the width by clicking directly between A and B. Then we see this slider, so to say, hold left click again and can drag it to whatever width we think is appropriate. All right. Since we're already in adjusting the width of the cells, while this looks good, I cannot read all the products because gummy bears is wider than the width of the cell. So what I could do is now drag the cell wider, but now, okay, it's too wide. Is gummy bears the wider thing overall, or should I drag it smaller? So how wide should it be? And there's an easy shortcut here. Just click double, and then it's exactly as wide as the widest text within this column by just double clicking on each cell. The next thing which I do not like is that now date is to the left because somewhere down there December or whatever is longer, so it's prolonged, and I would like to have the header at least in the middle, bold, whatever marked. So by going back to start, I can add, first of all, make it bold. I can center it from left to right, as well as I could center it from top to bottom if I wanted to. And I'd like to give it a background of gray or any other color you might prefer. Then maybe I want to have a border around that. So now I can see all of them, but maybe a thick one as well. So by going to borders, I can adjust whatever border I want by giving this. I'm just making borders all around each cell. This is an outer border, which is thicker, which I like to use because now it's, you see, this is now different. And if I then have, I don't know, let's just make it quickly. No, sorry, this one, and then that border again. It now looks like, okay, this is the top header, and then here the rest comes. And I could, I don't know, make such a border as well. So now this is the table, but within it I see every cell. That's what I like to do. But I can adjust borders as you want to. You could just say, okay, I only want it to the left. Then you say, oh no, that's not enough. Now I want a border to the right. All right. I don't want borders at all. Clicking on right again, it should go away usually, but it doesn't. Well, what you could do as well is use an empty cell, click on copy format, paste it on here, and then it's formatted like that other cell I used. That means if I now use this cell and use it down here, it's exactly formatted as this row on top. I can paste formats as well. A big problem now is to format all of those cells. I would now highlight them and drag it down. And some of you with your laptops in front of you, and while some of you might have a MacBook with quite a good touchpad, it's still a hassle because you would now to drag that down to over 10,000 rows we have. That takes some time, it's a hassle. And that's why we tend to use shortcuts. Microsoft overall is really good in making shortcuts, building into the operating system but as well in their Office programs. So each Windows user knows you do not use the animation and sliding around with your mice or mouse. What you do is use your keyboard as often as you can, because that's faster with shortcuts. Mac users tend to not use that as much because they have their touchpad. Overall, that's a bit slower, but works fine as well. But within Office programs, shortcuts is the way to go to, because they're from Microsoft, and Microsoft tends to use more shortcuts. I'm using a Windows operating system, as you can see. So I have the problem of knowing all the shortcuts for Windows and for Excel used in Windows. If you have a Mac, there are shortcuts for you as well. The best thing you could do is go to a website like this one, excelchat.net, keyboard shortcuts for Excel. And then you see the shortcuts for Windows users as well as for Mac users. What we need to use now is that we extend the selection to the last cell on the right and the last cell on the bottom. And herefore, we hold down Control, or in German STRG, so Steuerung or Control, Shift, and then we use the arrow keys on our keyboard. Since Control isn't a key for Mac users, they have their own Command key nowadays. They use that one, and the Shift symbol is differently, but it's basically the same. That's the one we use to write in caps. Depending on American keyboard, it's called Shift. In the German Windows keyboard, it would look exactly like that as well, so it gets more confusing. But in the end, you do know where your Shift key is, you do know where your Control or Command key is, then you use the arrow keys from there. So coming back to Excel, that means what I want to do is now hold Control and Shift and then put the button down. So I hit the down key, down arrow. And by that, I mark now the first cell till the cell to the bottom. And if I now hit the right key, I mark from the left cell to the rightest cell, which has text included. And by that, now I can transfer the format to all cells overall in one application of the borders here. Why is that so? Well, because with Control, I can move around in the document with the arrow keys from left to right to bottom and top. And with Shift, I can mark cells with the arrow keys as I want to. So if I then hold Control Shift together, I'm going to the bottom and marking at the same time with the Control keys. That's why. All right. So now I did it in my own formatting, which is nice, but to be honest, some of you, might want to go back to standard formatting. So we mark again everything. So Control Shift to the right or Command Shift to the right, Command Shift to the bottom. Everything is marked. Then I drag the slider up so I can see what I'm doing, and I can just format that as a table, and then I have already predefined format tables I could use. For example, this one a lot of people like to use. What it did as well is that it already introduced filtering systems, so you could apply them as well by data filter. But what it does is, if I click on that, I can now select, for example, that I do not want to see everything. I only want to see gummy bears. And then I only see the gummy bear selections. So that's already a quite nice feature we got for free. Last thing which we could do, as you can see as well, that here's white background and here I see all those cell grid lines, right? And you could change that at Ansicht or View, and then do hit the check mark for grid lines, or uncheck it, or check it if you want it. In the end, that looks nicer, because now it looks like a piece of paper where there's a table which I inserted, and it already directs my eyes onto what is relevant. The thing is, it's harder to work in, because now it's hard for me to hit age, let's say I want to hit age 7, or well, I did it, but it's harder to see if it's age 6 and so forth. Hence, my tip is, while you work on it, put in grid lines. Once you finished, uncheck it, so whoever you give it to only sees what they need to see. All right, so much for formatting and all of that stuff. That was part 0. This video is now over. We will come back in part 1 where we talk about the if command or the if formula, or in Germany, the wenn Befehl, which we need to do a lot of stuff. So thanks for your attention. See you in the next video.